This is not just a story, it's a confession. If you believe that no betrayal should remain hidden, support this voice. Subscribe, leave your comment, and share where you are watching from. Your presence makes every word matter. I still remember the moment her words cut through me like a blade. My daughter's small voice trembled as she looked at me with wide eyes, whispering, "Mommy, I heard Daddy calling someone else my love." For a second, I could not breathe. The walls of the house I had worked so hard to build seemed to close in on me. The furniture, the pictures, even the clock on the wall, all bearing silent witness to a truth I was never meant to hear from my own child. My heart began to pound, each beat echoing in my ears louder than the last, until all I could do was hold her tiny hands and force a smile I did not feel. Inside, I was breaking, pieces of trust shattering into dust. I had sacrificed years for this family. Since 2010, when we bought this modest home in Houston, I carried the weight of endless double shifts, late nights sewing clothes for extra money, and weekends I should have spent resting, but instead spent at the market trying to stretch every dollar. I did it all for him, for us, for the little girl now sitting in front of me with fear in her voice. Every bill paid, every meal cooked, every Christmas tree lit was my silent devotion, and he knew it. Or at least I thought he did. I could not let my daughter see me crumble, so I hugged her and told her maybe she misheard, that sometimes adults said things they did not mean. But as soon as she fell asleep, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the dim light of my phone, scrolling through our photos, our text messages. Every good morning and I love you he had sent me. I wanted to believe in them, to believe in the man who had once held my hand under the rain in San Antonio, swearing we would face everything together. But the doubt burned inside me like acid, and I knew there was only one way to find out. That night, I downloaded an app on my phone, one that could record audio in the background. I placed it on the table near where he usually made his late-night calls. My hands trembled as I set it up, my chest heavy with guilt and fear. What if I was wrong? What if my daughter was simply repeating something out of context? But what if she wasn't? I told myself I owed her the truth. More than that, I owed myself the truth after 15 years of standing by his side. When he walked in later, his shirt smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, I kissed him on the cheek as though nothing was wrong. My lips barely touched his skin, but my entire body screamed. He smiled, distracted, scrolling through his phone before heading to the living room. I excused myself, pretending to fold laundry, pretending to live inside the illusion a little longer while my phone recorded every sound. Each tick of the clock in that room felt like the countdown to the end of my marriage. Hours passed before I dared to listen. My daughter slept in the next room, breathing peacefully, her innocence untouched by the storm I was about to unleash. With shaking fingers, I pressed play. At first, I only heard silence, the sound of him walking, the clink of a glass. Then his voice. Warm, gentle, the same tone he once reserved only for me. "Good night, my love," he whispered. My heart froze. Then a laugh, soft, flirtatious, feminine, echoed through the recording, confirming everything my daughter had said. The world collapsed inside my chest. My breath caught, my vision blurred, and I dropped the phone on the floor, its glow casting a cruel light on the tears that streamed down my face. 15 years of loyalty, of shared dreams, of sacrifices no one else saw, all reduced to a lie I had to hear from a hidden recording. I thought of the money I had wired to his family in Mexico when he said they were struggling, of the vacations I gave up so he could buy a new truck, of the years I told myself love was about patience and trust. All of it mocked me now, each memory turned bitter. But even in that moment of devastation, a part of me hardened. I remembered my daughter's voice, her innocent warning. She had trusted me enough to tell me, to break a secret too heavy for her small shoulders. I could not let her see me defeated. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and told myself this was not the end. This was only the beginning of the truth. And so, I made a choice that night. I would not confront him with screaming or accusations. I would gather everything, piece by piece, until his lies had no place to hide. He had underestimated me, just as he had underestimated the silence of our home. If he thought he could break the family I built with my blood and sweat, he would soon discover how wrong he was. The next morning, I looked at him differently. He poured his coffee like nothing had happened, humming softly as if the world was exactly as it should be. I studied his hands, the same hands that once held mine with tenderness, now carrying the weight of betrayal. I forced myself to smile and kiss him on the cheek before he left for work, but inside, my chest was a battlefield. Every beat of my heart was both fury and fear, a desperate struggle to stay composed for the sake of my daughter. She was only 9, too young to understand the cruelty of lies, too young to know that her father's promises were already broken glass beneath our feet. I began to notice things I had once ignored. The late-night showers, the sudden text messages he hid with the tilt of his phone, the way he avoided my eyes when I asked simple questions. I had trained myself for years to believe in him, to trust in his stories of working late or helping a friend. But now every excuse sounded hollow, every word an echo of deception. And the more I watched, the more I realized how carefully he had built this facade, how he relied on my loyalty to cover the holes in his own lies. By 2018, I had already spent nearly a decade sacrificing for us. I worked double shifts at the clinic, sometimes 12 hours on my feet, so he could chase jobs that never lasted more than a few months. He called it building something better for the future, and I believed him. I even sent $500 a month to his parents, convinced that we were helping them survive. He made me feel guilty if I questioned it, reminding me of how they had raised him with nothing. I thought I was being a good wife, a good mother, carrying the weight for all of us. But as I stood there holding the recording on my phone, I saw it for what it really was: manipulation dressed as love. Still, I could not walk away without proof, without building the full picture of what he was hiding. So I started keeping track. Every receipt, every unexplained charge, every new excuse. I began recording more nights, sometimes leaving my phone on the kitchen counter, sometimes in the car. Each file was a knife, carving deeper into the image of the man I once adored. I heard him laughing, whispering, planning nights I was never invited to. And worse than the words themselves was the tenderness in his voice, the same tenderness he had stolen from me. One evening, as I folded clothes in our small bedroom, my daughter came in quietly and sat on the bed. She asked me if Daddy was angry at me because he seemed distant. My throat closed as I tried to find the right words, but I knew I couldn't tell her the truth yet. I just stroked her hair and told her that sometimes adults had problems they needed to work through. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment I wondered if she already understood more than she let on. Children always feel the storms we try to hide. The tension grew heavier with each passing day. Our dinners became silent, filled only with the clinking of forks against plates. The man I once knew was vanishing before my eyes, replaced by someone I no longer recognized, someone who smiled at me in daylight but carried another life in the shadows. The distance between us was no longer just emotional, it was physical, a cold wall that divided our bed every night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the sound of his breathing beside me both comforting and unbearable. One night in March, as the rain tapped against the windows, I gathered enough courage to listen to another recording. His voice came through, softer than ever. "I promise I'll see you this weekend," he said. "She thinks I'm working." My stomach twisted, my hands trembling as I pressed the phone closer to my ear. Then the other voice, calm, sweet, so painfully real, answered, "I miss you already, love." In that instant, my world wasn't just broken, it was burning. I sat on the floor, the cold tiles pressing against my knees, and let out a sob so deep it shook the walls of the room. Yet even through the pain, something inside me refused to surrender. I thought about every dollar I had saved, every meal I had skipped, every hour of sleep I had lost to give my family a better life. Was this what I had sacrificed for? To be mocked in my own home? To be betrayed so openly that even my child could hear it? No, I would not be destroyed so easily. I began to plan, quietly, carefully. If he wanted to live in lies, I would uncover each one. And when the time came, He would have no choice but to face the truth he had tried so hard to bury. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a theater where everyone else knew their roles except me. He played the devoted husband in front of neighbors, smiling wide as he held my hand at Sunday Mass, while I carried inside me the growing burden of secrets. I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching scenes unfold that no longer belonged to me. Every time he said, "I love you," my skin crawled, because I had heard him say those same words to someone else, dripping with sincerity that used to be mine. I started to notice how skilled he was at twisting reality. If he came home late and I asked about it, he would sigh, rub his forehead, and accuse me of being paranoid. "Why don't you trust me after all these years?" he would say, his voice heavy with false disappointment. And somehow, a part of me still questioned myself. Had I become bitter? Was I imagining things? That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It makes you doubt your own sanity before you finally see the truth laid bare. One afternoon, in May 2019, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. It was from a hotel downtown, a $220 charge for a single night. My hands shook as I held it, reading the date over and over. That same night, he had told me he was helping a friend move furniture. I pressed the paper to my chest, the ink smudging against my fingers, and whispered to myself, "This is it. This is the proof." But instead of confronting him, I folded it carefully and placed it inside a notebook where I kept everything I had gathered. The recordings, the notes, the screenshots of suspicious messages I managed to catch when he left his phone unattended. It became my silent arsenal, a book of betrayal I would one day open like a weapon. My daughter began to sense the tension even more. She would ask why I seemed sad, why Daddy didn't sit at the table as much anymore, why he spent so many evenings outside taking calls in the car. I wanted to shield her, to protect her innocence, but she was too smart. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mommy, don't cry when you think I'm sleeping." Her words shattered me. I kissed her forehead, tears soaking into her pillow, and promised her silently that I would not let this be her story forever. The manipulation grew sharper when I started pulling away. If I didn't answer his calls right away, he would accuse me of hiding something. If I seemed distant, he suddenly turned affectionate, cooking dinner, buying flowers, telling me he couldn't live without me. It was a cruel dance, one that made me dizzy with confusion. But each time he tried to pull me back into his web, I remembered the voices on those recordings, the hotel receipt, the perfume that lingered on his shirts. His kindness was no longer a comfort. It was camouflage. By the summer of 2019, I was exhausted. My body ached from work, my spirit from silence. At night, I lay awake imagining conversations that never happened. Me screaming, him confessing, the walls echoing with the truth. But when morning came, I swallowed it all, choosing instead to wait, to gather, to survive, because deep down I knew he would not stop. Men like him never stop until they are exposed. And then came the request that broke whatever fragile piece of me still believed in us. It was late August when he sat at the table, his phone buzzing beside him, and asked me for $5,000. He said it was for a business opportunity, a chance to finally start something stable. My heart sank because I recognized the urgency in his voice, the same tone he used when lying. I told him we didn't have that kind of money, that we were already behind on bills. He snapped at me, his face darkening, accusing me of never supporting his dreams. In that moment, I saw the man he truly was. Not just unfaithful, but manipulative, willing to drain every drop of my sacrifice for his own hidden desires. That night, I sat on the floor of the kitchen long after he had gone to bed, staring at the numbers on our bank statement. Years of saving, years of sacrifice. And now he wanted to strip me of the little security I had left. My fingers traced the cold tiles as I thought about the countless times I had believed in him, the countless times I had chosen to love him despite the doubts. But something inside me shifted then. Love no longer outweighed survival. I knew I couldn't keep pretending, not for him, not even for myself. I stared at the numbers on the bank statement until they blurred into nothing but smudges of despair. My hands trembled as I remembered every hour I had spent under the fluorescent lights of the clinic. Every Saturday I had given up with my daughter so I could pick up one more shift. Every dream I had postponed so he could have his chance at a better life. And now he had the audacity to demand $5,000, knowing full well it was money we didn't have. Money that would strip away the roof over our heads if I gave in. The betrayal was no longer only about another woman. It was about the slow theft of my soul, piece by piece, until nothing of me would be left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched him lying beside me, his chest rising and falling as if he carried no weight at all, while I felt crushed under the enormity of what I knew. I listened to the silence of the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second felt like a reminder that I was running out of time, that every day I stayed was another day of sacrifice wasted on someone who didn't deserve it. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "Not anymore. Not like this." The next morning, I began to move differently. My smiles became rehearsed, my words measured. I gave him no reason to suspect I was watching, documenting, preparing. At work, I confided in no one, but I carried my notebook with me everywhere, the one filled with receipts, screenshots, and recordings. It became my shield, my silent weapon against the lies. Each page was a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that the manipulation I had endured for years had finally been stripped bare. My daughter, sweet and perceptive, noticed the changes too. She clung to me more, as though she sensed I was building a wall between myself and her father. One evening, she asked if we could bake cookies together. Flour covered our hands, and as we laughed softly in the kitchen, I realized it had been months since I had felt a moment of peace. But even then, a pang of sorrow struck me. She deserved a father who respected her mother, who didn't shatter trust so carelessly. I promised myself silently that I would not let her grow up believing this was what love looked like. By September, his lies grew bolder. He claimed to be working late nearly every night, yet the overtime never appeared on his paychecks. He spent weekends helping friends, but came home smelling of cologne I didn't recognize. My anger simmered quietly beneath my skin, but I did not confront him. Instead, I played the role he expected, the devoted wife who nodded, who smiled, who accepted the scraps of affection he tossed my way. Because deep down, I knew the time for confrontation was coming, and when it arrived, I wanted the truth to crush him without mercy. One evening, I decided to follow him. I told him I had an extra shift, kissed my daughter goodnight, and slipped into my car as soon as he left. My heart raced as I kept my headlights dim, trailing him through the familiar streets of Houston until he pulled into a hotel parking lot. I parked far away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I watched as he stepped out, adjusting his shirt, and greeted a woman who had been waiting by the entrance. They embraced, not with the hesitation of strangers, but with the ease of lovers who had done this 100 times before. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him kiss her forehead, the same tender gesture he once used with me. I wanted to scream, to run out and drag him away, to shatter the illusion right there under the fluorescent lights of the hotel sign. But I didn't. I stayed in the car, tears streaming down my face, my chest heaving with the weight of betrayal. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just about him cheating. It was about the life he had stolen from me, the years he had taken, the sacrifices he had demanded without shame. And I knew then that the confrontation I was preparing for would not just be about an affair. It would be about reclaiming my life. When I finally drove away, the streets blurred through my tears. I parked in front of our house and sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. I looked older, heavier with sorrow, but also sharper, more determined. For the first time, I didn't just feel like a victim. I felt like a woman on the edge of transformation. The pain was still there, raw and merciless, but beneath it burned a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. The night I followed him to that hotel changed something deep inside me. When I finally lay in bed beside him, pretending to be asleep as he slipped under the covers past midnight, I realized the illusion had ended. There was no going back to who we had been, no repairing the cracks with apologies or promises. I had seen too much, heard too much, felt too much. Every time he touched my arm or brushed against me in the dark, my skin recoiled. It was as if the man I once loved had become a stranger wearing his face. I stopped searching for reasons to excuse him and began to count the years I had lost. Since 2010, I had been his anchor, his shelter, his safety net. I worked through exhaustion, sent money to his family, and even gave up my own dreams of going back to school so he could pursue his. Yet here he was, spending his nights in hotel rooms with another woman, lying to me with the same mouth that once promised forever. The bitterness was a poison spreading through my veins, but it also gave me clarity. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit he didn't deserve me. But leaving was not as simple as packing a bag and walking away. There was my daughter, whose world revolved around both of us. There were bills, debts, and the constant weight of survival in a city where everything cost more than we could ever seem to afford. And most of all, there was fear. Fear of what he might do if I confronted him. Fear of the anger that simmered beneath his carefully crafted charm. I had seen glimpses of it before. The sharp words, the sudden temper when things didn't go his way. I knew that when the truth finally came out, it would not be gentle. So I planned in silence. Each day I pretended, each night I documented. I saved money in secret, slipping $20 bills into an envelope hidden at the back of my closet. I spoke to a lawyer during my lunch breaks, whispering questions about custody and finances as if I were conspiring in a crime. I moved through life like an actress in a play no one else knew they were watching, smiling at neighbors, chatting with coworkers, all while carrying the weight of an ending I hadn't yet revealed. My daughter remained my only source of strength. She would curl up beside me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, and ask innocent questions like, "Mommy, will we go to the beach next summer?" I would smile and nod, though inside I wondered what our lives would look like by then. If the house we sat in would still be ours. If her father would still be part of her daily world. The guilt of keeping secrets from her burned me, but I knew she deserved a future built on truth, not the fragile lies we were living in. Then came the night when the lies spilled over into cruelty. He came home angry, slamming the door, muttering about money. He accused me of not supporting him, of being selfish, of caring only about myself. The words hit me like stones, each one erasing the sacrifices I had made for over a decade. I stood there in the kitchen, my hands trembling, my daughter listening quietly from her room, and realized he was no longer just unfaithful. He was dangerous, not because he hit me, but because he was eroding me piece by piece, convincing me that my worth was nothing without him. When he finally stormed off to bed, I sat at the table long after midnight, staring at the shadows on the wall. My tears had dried, leaving only a hollow ache. I pulled out my notebook, flipped through the receipts, the screenshots, the notes. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was evidence of a crime against my life, against the years I had given. I whispered to myself, one day soon, this ends. And in that moment, something shifted again. The fear didn't vanish, but it began to lose its grip. Because what terrified me more than his anger was the thought of living one more year, one more month, one more day pretending that his betrayal was something I could endure. I realized then that survival wasn't enough anymore. I needed freedom. The envelope of money I had been hiding became my only lifeline. Every $20 bill I tucked inside felt like a secret promise to myself, a silent rebellion against the prison my life had become. By October 2019, I had saved nearly $1,200, barely enough to cover rent for a month and groceries. But it was something. Each time I slipped the envelope deeper into the closet, under folded sweaters, I reminded myself that I was no longer powerless. I was preparing, even if my steps were small. But small steps were all I could take in the shadows of his suspicion. He grew more controlling as the months passed, perhaps sensing that I was slipping away. He asked questions about my schedule, checked my phone when he thought I wasn't looking, and even accused me of having secrets of my own. The irony of his accusations nearly broke me. It was as if he was projecting his guilt onto me, painting me as the unfaithful one while he continued his double life without shame. I learned to lie with a calm face. I told him I was working late when I was really meeting with a lawyer. I said I was visiting a coworker when I was quietly opening a new bank account in my name only. Every lie I told felt like a betrayal of the woman I used to be. Honest, devoted, loyal. But I knew it was necessary. He had forced me into this role, into a version of myself I had never imagined. And with every careful deception, I began to feel stronger. My daughter remained the only innocent piece of this puzzle. Her laughter, her questions, her drawings taped to the refrigerator reminded me daily why I couldn't give up. She began writing little notes, leaving them on my pillow. "I love you, Mommy. You're the best." Each one was both a balm and a wound, because I knew she deserved so much more than the chaos hidden behind our walls. Sometimes I would cry quietly after she fell asleep, clutching her notes like a shield against the loneliness that consumed me. The turning point came one evening in November. I overheard him on the phone again, his voice muffled but unmistakable. He was making plans for a weekend away. My chest tightened as I pressed my ear to the wall, listening as he laughed softly, calling her mi amor, with the same tenderness he used when he asked me to marry him 15 years earlier. When he hung up, I felt something inside me break completely. The illusions, the justifications, the fragile hope that maybe he would change. It all disintegrated in that moment. I no longer saw him as my husband. I saw him as an intruder in my life, a man who had stolen years from me under the mask of love. That night, after he fell asleep, I played the recordings again, not to torture myself, but to remind myself why I couldn't back down. His words were knives, slicing away at the woman I had been. But instead of bleeding, I began to build armor. Each recording became another brick in the wall I was constructing between us. I didn't feel only pain anymore. I felt resolve. By December, my plan was clearer. I would confront him, but not blindly. I would wait until I had everything ready: the money, the lawyer, the custody papers. It wasn't just about catching him in a lie. It was about reclaiming the life he had tried to take from me. I wanted him to know that the woman he thought he had broken was still standing, stronger than he had ever imagined. And yet, late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of my choices pressed down on me, fear crept back in. What if he retaliated? What if he tried to take my daughter from me? What if the courts believed him and not me? I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. But then I remembered my daughter's little notes, her soft voice, the way she held my hand when she sensed I was sad. And I knew, no matter how terrifying the road ahead, I could not let her grow up watching her mother crumble. So I made myself a promise that winter, the next year, would not be another cycle of betrayal and silence. It would be the year I finally spoke, the year I tore the mask from his face and forced him into the light. The new year arrived with an icy wind that seemed to sweep through every corner of the house, carrying with it a sense of endings. It was January 2020, and as the world celebrated fresh beginnings, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the silent phone in front of me. My daughter was asleep, curled under her blanket with her favorite stuffed bear, while he was working late again. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. And in that silence, I made a vow to myself. This year, his lies would no longer define me. I began to move faster with my plans. I spoke again to the lawyer, this time with more determination. We discussed custody, finances, and the safety of my daughter. The lawyer's voice was steady, practical, but I felt the weight of every word as though it were pressing against my chest. "Gather as much evidence as you can," she advised, "and make sure you have financial independence before you confront him." Her words echoed in my mind for days, guiding my every step. At work, I picked up extra shifts when possible, my body aching, but my resolve unshaken. Each dollar I earned was a brick in the foundation of the freedom I was building. I told no one, not even my closest friend, because I knew secrets shared too early could unravel everything. I had learned that silence could be a weapon, and now I wielded it carefully. At home, I played my role perfectly. I laughed at his jokes, cooked his favorite meals, and let him believe that nothing had changed. But behind my smiles was the growing strength of a woman who was preparing for war. He had underestimated me for too long, assuming my devotion would blind me forever. What he didn't realize was that betrayal has a way of sharpening even the softest hearts into steel. My daughter's presence kept me grounded. On weekends, we would walk to the park, her small hand gripping mine as she told me stories about her school, her friends, her dreams. She wanted to be an artist, she said, and I encouraged her with every fiber of my being. In those moments, I felt alive again, reminded that my purpose was bigger than my pain. She was the reason I endured, the reason I pushed forward when fear threatened to paralyze me. But fear never truly left. Each night, as I lay in bed beside him, pretending to sleep, my mind spun with possibilities. What if he discovered my plans? What if he grew violent? What if my daughter witnessed the confrontation I was preparing for? The questions haunted me, keeping me awake long after the house had gone quiet. Sometimes I would slip into the bathroom, lock the door, and cry silently into a towel so no one could hear. My reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. A woman worn thin by secrets but held upright by sheer will. Then, in late February, the unexpected happened. He left his phone charging in the kitchen while he took a shower. My hands trembled as I picked it up, knowing I shouldn't, but also knowing I had to. My fingers swiped the screen, and there it was. A string of messages, sweet words, intimate photos, plans for trips I had never been told about. Each line was another knife, another confirmation that I had not been imagining any of it. My breath caught as I scrolled, the air in the room growing heavier with each revelation. I copied what I could, taking photos with my own phone, my heart racing as if I were committing a crime. But when I finished, I felt no guilt. Instead, I felt a strange calm. The lies were no longer whispers in the dark or recordings in secret. They were written in his own words. Undeniable, undeniable even to him. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. That night, as he slept soundly, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The fear was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Anticipation. The end was approaching, and I was no longer afraid of it. I welcomed it, even if it meant walking through fire, because I knew that on the other side of that fire was the freedom I had been craving for far too long. The screenshots I had saved on my phone became both a burden and a weapon. Every time I opened the folder and stared at his words, "I miss you. You're my everything. Can't wait to hold you again," I felt my stomach twist, but I also felt stronger. The evidence was no longer whispers, no longer shadows. It was concrete, undeniable, the kind of truth that could no longer be buried beneath his charm or his excuses. For years he had twisted my doubts into guilt, but now I held in my hands the proof that my instincts had been right all along. March of 2020 was when everything inside me reached a breaking point. The world outside was shifting into chaos, with talk of lockdowns and uncertainty. But inside my home, the storm had already been raging for months. He became more irritable, snapping at me over small things. Why the bills were late, why dinner wasn't ready on time, why I looked distant. Each word from him felt like gasoline poured over a fire that had been burning in silence. And though my heart still ached, it no longer broke. It hardened. I remember one evening vividly. We sat at the table, my daughter coloring quietly beside us, when he leaned back in his chair and told me he needed more money. His voice was casual, almost careless, as if asking me to pass the salt. "Just a couple thousand," he said, "for an opportunity that'll finally pay off." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not a husband but a parasite, someone who had been feeding off my sacrifices, draining me dry while giving nothing in return. I wanted to scream, to throw the receipts and the screenshots in his face, but my daughter's innocent humming kept me still. Instead, I nodded slowly, hiding the rage boiling inside me. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor with the envelope of money in my hands. I counted the bills over and over, 1,660. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was freedom in paper form. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to myself, "This is for us, not for him." For the first time, I no longer felt like I was stealing from my own life. I was reclaiming it. By April, I had begun drafting a plan with my lawyer. Custody papers, financial arrangements, even safety measures in case he reacted badly. The process was terrifying, each step filled with what-ifs that made my chest tighten. What if he turned violent? What if my daughter had to testify? What if I couldn't survive on my own? But alongside the fear was a new feeling, hope. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild a life without his lies. A life where my daughter and I could laugh freely without the shadow of his betrayal hanging over us. Then came the night I nearly broke. He came home drunk, his words slurred, his temper short. He accused me of being ungrateful, of never appreciating everything he had done for me. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but instead I stood frozen, my daughter's footsteps echoing softly down the hallway. She peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with fear. In that moment, my decision was sealed. I could endure 1,000 heartbreaks, but I would not allow her to grow up afraid in her own home. After he stumbled into the bedroom and fell asleep, I tucked my daughter back into bed. She clung to me, whispering, "Mommy, don't be sad. I'll take care of you." Her words, so tender and small, cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. I kissed her forehead and promised, with every ounce of strength I had left, that one day soon she would see what it meant to live in peace. That night, as I lay awake listening to his heavy breathing beside me, I realized the moment of confrontation was no longer far away. The lies, the manipulation, the theft of years, it had all led us here. My heart raced, not with fear this time, but with certainty. The end was coming, and I was ready to meet it head-on. The morning after that night, the house felt different. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now carried only silence, thick and suffocating. He left early, claiming he had errands, and I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street. My daughter was still asleep, her small body curled under the blanket, her breathing steady. For a moment, I let myself believe we were safe, even if just for a few hours. And in that quiet, I knew the time had come. I opened the closet and pulled out the envelope of money. My hands no longer trembled as I counted the bills. This was not fear anymore. It was resolve. I slid the envelope into my purse along with my notebook of evidence. The receipts, the screenshots, the recordings that had kept me awake so many nights. Each piece of paper was a fragment of the life I had lived in silence, the proof of everything I had endured. Today, those fragments would become my voice. I called the lawyer and set an appointment for the following week. My voice was steady as I spoke, even though my heart pounded in my chest. "I'm ready," I told her. She paused for a moment, then said, "Once you take this step, there's no turning back." Her words hung in the air like a warning, but instead of fear, I felt a surge of strength. "That's exactly what I want," I replied. When he returned that afternoon, I studied him with new eyes. The man who once made me laugh until my stomach hurt, who once promised me forever, now felt like nothing more than a stranger in my home. He asked what was for dinner, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and scrolled through his phone while I stirred the pot on the stove. Every movement was calculated, every smile a performance, but I saw through it all, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of betrayal. I felt pity for a man who had built his life on lies, who thought he was untouchable, who never realized the woman beside him was already planning her escape. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't press play on the recordings or reread the messages. I didn't need to. The evidence was no longer for me. It was for the moment when he would try to deny it all. I lay in bed with my daughter's little body curled against mine, her warmth grounding me, her soft breaths reminding me of what I was fighting for. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to her. No matter how messy, how painful, how terrifying this would be, we would come out of it together. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I moved money quietly into my new account, packed a small bag of essentials, and kept it hidden in the trunk of my car. Each step was a thread in the safety net I was weaving, fragile but growing stronger with every action. I told myself over and over that I was not just leaving a man. I was reclaiming the years he had stolen, the dignity he had tried to erase, the love I had poured into a marriage that no longer existed. But even as my plan came together, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on me. Would he fight me for custody? Would he try to twist the truth the way he always had, making me out to be the unstable one? My mind raced with scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Yet every time fear threatened to consume me, I returned to the same image. My daughter's face, her eyes wide with innocence, her voice whispering, "Mommy, I'll take care of you." No child should have to carry that burden. And I would not let her. By the end of the month, I was ready. Ready to speak the truth. Ready to confront him with everything I had. Ready to step into the unknown, even if it meant walking away with nothing but my daughter and the envelope of cash. Because nothing, no house, no furniture, no shared memories, was worth more than our freedom. That night, as I stood in the kitchen with the lights dimmed and the city quiet outside, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow it begins." The morning I decided to confront him, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the house itself was holding its breath. My daughter was still asleep when I walked into the kitchen, clutching the notebook of evidence in my hands. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever, marking each second as though it were counting down to something inevitable. I set the notebook on the table, next to the envelope of money, and sat there waiting, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might break through my chest. When his car pulled into the driveway, I felt a cold wave rush over me. This was it. No more silence, no more pretending. He walked in carrying his usual careless smile, humming to himself as he tossed his keys on the counter. "What's for breakfast?" he asked casually, as though our lives weren't about to shatter. I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed the notebook across the table toward him. He frowned, confused, then flipped it open. At first, he tried to laugh it off. "What is this? You've been spying on me?" His voice was sharp, defensive, but I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. He turned the pages, receipts, screenshots, printed copies of the messages I had saved. His face grew darker with each one. "This doesn't mean anything," he snapped, slamming the notebook shut. "You don't understand." But I did understand. More than he ever thought I would. I stood, my voice trembling but steady. "I understand enough. I understand that while I worked double shifts, while I sent money to your family, while I carried this house on my back, you were calling someone else my love. I understand that the man I married no longer exists. And I understand that my daughter deserves better than this." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking clock. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. I braced myself for anger, for denial, for the storm I had been dreading for months. And it came. He shouted, accusing me of destroying the family, of being manipulative, of ruining everything he had built. The irony of his words struck me like a cruel joke. Everything he had built was with my hands, my sweat, my sacrifices. I let him rant, his voice echoing off the walls, until he finally grew quiet. Then I spoke the words that had been burning inside me for years. "I'm done." My voice was calm, steady, almost unfamiliar to my own ears. He blinked, taken aback, as if he hadn't expected me to say it out loud. "You don't get to control me anymore. You don't get to take one more year, one more dollar, one more piece of me. I'm done." He tried to plead then. His voice softened, his eyes filled with crocodile tears. He reached for my hand, telling me we could fix this, that he would change, that he loved me. But his words no longer had power. I pulled my hand away and shook my head. "You don't get to say those words to me anymore." My daughter walked into the room then, rubbing her eyes, clutching her stuffed bear. She looked at both of us, confusion written on her small face. I bent down and pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly. "It's going to be okay," I whispered into her hair, though my own body was trembling. She nodded, as if she believed me. And in that moment, I believed myself too. That night, I slept with the bag I had packed hidden by the door, the envelope of money tucked safely inside. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, the courts, the battles, the unknown future waiting beyond these walls. But I knew one thing. I would never again allow myself to live in silence. The woman who had endured years of manipulation was gone. In her place stood someone fiercer, someone who had walked through betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. And as I lay there with my daughter's hand resting in mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom, fragile but real, blooming quietly in the dark. The following days felt like walking on shattered glass. Every step I took was careful, deliberate, because one wrong move could cut too deep. He still lived in the house, moving through the rooms as if nothing had changed, but something in his eyes betrayed him. He knew I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. His attempts at charm grew desperate. Flowers left on the table, promises whispered at night, sudden bursts of affection in front of our daughter, but I saw through it all. Each gesture was a performance, an act meant to keep me tethered to his lies. I carried my evidence like a shield. When he accused me of exaggerating, I showed him the screenshots. When he claimed I was imagining things, I replayed the recordings. Every denial he threw at me was met with proof he could not erase. His face would flush with anger, his voice rising. But I no longer shrank back. Instead, I stood taller, my voice steady, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally reclaiming my life. At night, I lay awake next to my daughter, listening to her steady breathing. The world outside our window was growing uncertain with the news of lockdowns and fear. But inside, the battle was already personal. I whispered prayers into the darkness, not for him, but for us, for strength, for clarity, for the courage to see this through no matter the cost. Sometimes I would picture the life I wanted, a small apartment filled with laughter, walls free of tension, mornings where I could drink coffee without the weight of dread pressing on my chest. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was enough to keep me moving. By April, the tension reached its peak. He began to demand control of our finances, insisting that I give him access to the new account I had opened. I refused. His temper flared, words flying like knives across the kitchen table. "You're tearing this family apart," he shouted. I stared at him, calm but firm, and replied, "No, you did that the moment you called another woman my love." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, he had no words to twist back at me. The lawyer called me one morning, her voice steady and reassuring. The papers were ready. Custody, finances, everything outlined with meticulous detail. I sat at my desk at work, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt tears slide down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. After years of silence, after months of secret planning, the path forward was finally visible. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. When I returned home that evening, I found him sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. The air between us was thick, filled with unspoken truths. I wanted to tell him it was over, that the papers were signed, that the future he thought he controlled was no longer his. But I stayed quiet, saving my strength for the day when the confrontation would not just be words, but actions backed by law. My daughter continued to be my anchor. One night as we lay in bed, she whispered, "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." My chest tightened as I held her closer, my tears soaking into her hair. She didn't know the battles I fought in silence, the nights I cried alone in the bathroom, the weight of decisions that threatened to crush me. But she felt my resolve, and in her innocence, she gave me the validation I needed. Strength was not about never breaking, it was about breaking and still choosing to stand. By May, I knew the confrontation would come soon. The lies could no longer coexist with the truth I held in my hands. The fear still lingered, whispering of what could go wrong, but it no longer controlled me. Because beneath it all was a quiet certainty. I was no longer living for him. I was living for me, and for the little girl who deserved to see her mother rise from the ashes of betrayal. The day the papers were finally served felt like the closing of a long, torturous chapter. I watched him unfold the envelope, his eyes scanning the lines that spelled out the end of everything we had built, or at least everything I thought we had built. His face went pale, then dark, his jaw tightening as he looked at me across the room. "So this is it?" he asked, his voice low, almost broken. I stood still, my daughter's hand in mine, and nodded. This is it. There was shouting, of course. Accusations, insults, attempts to twist the truth one last time. He claimed I was ungrateful, that I was poisoning our daughter against him, that I had destroyed the family, but his words no longer pierced me. They bounced off the armor I had forged through years of sacrifice, betrayal, and silence. Every time he raised his voice, I thought of the nights I cried into a towel so my daughter wouldn't hear, the nights I listened to his lies whispered to someone else, the nights I counted money in secret just to feel a shred of control. Those memories no longer made me weak. They made me unshakable. When he finally stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the frames on the wall rattled, I stood in the silence he left behind. My daughter looked up at me, her eyes wide, searching. I knelt in front of her, brushing the hair from her face, and whispered, "It's over. We're free." She wrapped her arms around my neck, her small body clinging to me with a relief she didn't yet fully understand. In that embrace, I felt years of weight slide off my shoulders. The weeks that followed were not easy. The legal battles began, the arguments over custody and money, the endless paperwork and court dates. There were moments I felt exhausted, moments when the fear of losing everything tried to drag me under. But each time I reminded myself why I had begun this journey. My daughter deserved peace. I deserved peace. And no storm he could create would ever be greater than the one I had already survived. I moved us into a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, and an old stove that rattled when it heated. But it was ours. For the first time in years, I felt the air in my lungs fill without heaviness. The laughter of my daughter echoed off the walls, filling the space with something that had been missing for far too long. Joy. I watched her draw pictures at the kitchen table, watched her sleep without fear, and realized that the home we had left behind was not a loss. It was a liberation. At night, when the house grew quiet, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and let myself reflect. I thought of the girl I once was, the woman who believed love meant sacrifice without end, who believed patience would one day be rewarded with loyalty. I grieved her, but I also honored her. Because without her resilience, without her devotion, I would not have survived long enough to become the woman I was now. Stronger, sharper, unwilling to settle for less than truth. Sometimes the pain still lingers. A song will play on the radio. A memory will flash across my mind. And for a moment, the old wounds ache. But then I look at my daughter's smile, the freedom in her laughter, and I know the scars are not signs of defeat. They are proof of survival. Proof that I chose not to let betrayal define me. Proof that even when the person you trust most turns against you, it is still possible to rebuild, to rise, to live again. If there is one truth I carry now, it is this. Love should never cost your dignity. Devotion should never demand your silence. And trust, once broken, should never chain you to someone who doesn't value it. I walked through fire, and though I was burned, I came out stronger. My daughter and I may have less now, but what we have is real, and it is enough. As I watch her grow, as I listen to her dreams, I know she is learning not just from my words, but from my choices. She is learning that strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. She is learning that betrayal does not end you. It frees you if you let it. And she is learning that her mother, though scarred, is unbreakable. And so our story continues, not one of loss, but of rebirth. The door that once closed behind him has opened 1,000 others for us. And in the quiet of our new life, I finally understand what freedom tastes like. It tastes like peace. It tastes like truth. It tastes like the sound of my daughter's laughter filling a home that belongs only to us.